In this demo, I want to show in our next incremental stage of development how to add additional instance variables and all their supporting infrastructure to our existing person class. So just to recap, over the course of 7 iterations, each of which we've saved off as incremental snapshots, we've put together all the basics of a class for one instance variable. Its constructors, its display methods, its accessor and mutators, its equivalence method, and some test code for it. This is about 150 some lines of code so far for one instance variable. What we're going to do now is show you how easy it's going to be to add a second and subsequent instance variables to it. So thinking back to our API, let's add one additional instance variable now. And just for grins, let's select the double instance variable height. So what we need to do, for starters, at the very beginning of our file, is add that one additional instance variable, private double height. And I'm going to comment this and perhaps specify that we want this in meters. Next, let's turn our attention to the constructors. For the default constructor, we need to do the following: add the instance variable and add some sensible default to it. Let's say a default value of 0 for height. For the full constructor, we need to add one additional input argument, so we'll say double height, and then following that inside, we'll simply say the instance variable this dot height equals the input parameter height. That's all we've got to do. And also keep in mind that when you're adding instance variables like this, you should probably put it in some sensible logical ordering. If you're not sure, just follow the API. That's usually a good guideline. Scrolling down a little bit, actually I'm going to give us a little bit more room to work here. For the toString method, remember we said that was going to be a comma separated output string, and we only have one instance variable so far. So let's do string concatenation plus a comma and a space plus the height. That's all we need to do. For the print, all we're doing here is we're simply printing out a second instance variable, and we'll label it as height, and we'll say we want to print out the height. This overloaded one doesn't even change. Then looking at the accessors and mutators, we've got these 3 for first name. So what we'll do, in a nice trick of code reuse, is we'll simply copy and paste that and then make the necessary changes. I'd like to keep my instance variables together. Some people like to group the accessors, then group the mutators. It's really up to you. This is just what I prefer. So just make sure that when you do these kind of copy and paste changes, you change them completely. So for example, this is going to be the height accessor. So we're returning a double, and this is going to be called, of course, get height, and we're returning the instance variable height. Then this is the height mutator, and it's going to be set height with a capital H. The input is now a double height, and then this dot height equals height, same as before. And we'll also provide an overloaded prompting mutator. So set height, Boolean input mode doesn't change. Now our data is actually a double. We've got our utility file, and at this point we should probably have a read double on hand. We'll change the prompt to enter height, and we'll also maybe provide the units we're expecting. And we'll turn around, and this data is now a double in this method, whereas before it was a string. But these have local method scope, so it's no problem to reuse the same method name. And now we'll change this to set height. Let's see, let's save this. Let's go to the equals method, and all of this basic structure is going to remain unchanged. The only thing we have to do here is, now that we have a second instance variable, we need a second test here. So this is where you want to be really careful with your balancing of parentheses. I believe this is correct. So I'm going to add a second condition, make this a compound condition. So I'm going to simply do and another condition. And instead of comparing height as a double, so instead of comparing it with equals, remember that we're comparing the absolute value to a tolerance. So for example, for this one, we'll do something like this. Math.abs, some quantity, is less than or equal to a tolerance. We'll define that in a moment. But what we're comparing would be p.get height minus this dot height. Same naming pattern as in the previous instance variable, and that should actually be a minus. Now we're comparing it to a tolerance, so we need to define that tolerance. So let's go back to the top of our file and add some more data. This isn't really an instance variable per se, but this will have global scope. So let's say private final double tall equals 0.0001, and let's say this is our equivalence tolerance. And going back to our equals method, we should be good so far. Now we get down to the test code, and we are going to have to make a couple of changes here. For example, our full constructor now needs a second argument. So let's say Fred is 1.6 meters tall, and the default constructor isn't going to change. The print of the constructor isn't going to change. But now we also need to test our accessors and mutators. So what we can do is we can add another analogous print statement for the height. So it'll be p2.get height, and we'll test our mutator in the same way, p2.set height. Let's say we're going to change this to 1.80 meters, and then we'll print it, and then in the same way we'll test our prompting mutators. Set height false, we're going to use the scanner mode, and then after we make both those changes, we'll print out the full state of the updated object. And I'm looking at the rest of this. The equality code shouldn't change at all, so I think we're done. Now, how much time did that take us? 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes? Not too bad, right, for one instance variable? That's a pretty quick change once we've got the basic structure in hand. We're not done yet, so let's save this, and now the moment of truth. Compile it. Ha! No errors made. So let's run this, and we're being prompted for a name. I'll say I'm 1.9 meters. By the way, here's the updates for the height, 1.6 meters. I'm going to say I'm 1.9 meters in height. I print this out. Our height has indeed been updated, and our equality method works properly. So in summary, that's how we'd go about adding one instance variable. And now that we've seen how the drill works, we can add all the additional instance variables in the similar manner. Once we've added all those instance variables, we should probably save this off to PersonPhase8.java per our past practices. Rather than doing that, in the second part of this demo, or a companion demo, I'm going to load up the saved version that has all of the other instance variables implemented, and I'll just walk you through all the changes that we made. But this is what we do to add one more instance variable using the patterns and the structure we've already put into place in the previous iterations.